Here we see a picture of George Whitefield, a great revival preacher of what we call the First Great Awakening. He's probably here somewhere in the 13 colonies in the 1730s, preaching the gospel, bringing people to salvation. He was the most popular preacher during the Great Awakening. So let's talk about these big changes. We'll start as we always do. I split these talks into 5 different sections. The first is context, and that is where I just share a little bit of the circumstances, the social, political world of people living through this period to help us understand what they were going through and how they responded to different things that happened to them. First thing I wanted to share was a concept called the Great Chain of Being. Now, when I talked about the ancient world and the Middle Ages, that people had a very hierarchical understanding of the world, and that they were comfortable with there being hierarchies, kings, noblemen, the fact that different people had a different status and were treated differently. That is still very much alive at the end of the late medieval and early modern periods, which is when we're starting today in the 1400s. And people believed in what was called the Great Chain of Being. This concept was borrowed from Plato and Aristotle and some other Greek philosophers, but there was also aspects of Christian thinking in it. So at the top of this hierarchy or Great Chain of Being was God himself. Below him were the angels. And then we enter the human world below the angels with kings and nobles. And then at the bottom of the levels of humans are commoners and slaves. And then below humans are animals, below animals, plants, and then inanimate natural objects, minerals and rocks. And the belief was that God had put everything in its place. In whatever level you were born or created, that was where you were going to stay. So the idea of upward mobility, social mobility, was foreign to the late medieval, early modern mind. And we'll see in this period that we look at today, that's going to change. But at least at the beginning of this period, it's commonly assumed. Some people are just born into a family, a dynasty, that they're a higher status and they deserve more respect and they dress differently. And people, like I said, were much more at home with that idea. The idea that all people should be treated equally, that status should be earned before, people demand respect, they should earn it. That is much more a modern idea. So the Great Chain of Being. Another thing that sort of goes along with that idea is the view of church and state that people held in the late Middle Ages and the early modern period. It's hard for us to understand how people didn't see why it was a good idea to let people believe what they want and worship as they want. Also a very modern idea. No, that's not how people thought. They assumed that there would be a certain kind of church, a certain kind of theology, a certain set of beliefs that all people in a given state would adhere to and follow. And there was no room in the late medieval mind for dissidents, for people of some sort of minority faith to thrive. It was assumed that all the citizens of a state would follow the king. They would all follow one religion or another. And throughout the Middle Ages, of course, in Europe, everyone was expected to follow the Roman Catholic Church and Roman Catholic belief. And those who preached and followed any different sorts of ideas were persecuted and often wiped out and killed. So it will take some time before people on a broad basis begin to entertain the idea that perhaps people of different faiths and different views can exist or coexist within one state. That idea will have to force its way into Western society.